are going to look at the big global clients to potentially work with. Maybe Allyson Stewart-Allen, who has written a book. She is the author of Working with Americans. Come on up, Allyson. She's going to share with you some tips on how to work with the USA. Big place with lots of money and very interesting people. So welcome, Allyson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. What a pleasure to be here. I'm London-based. I've been there for 35 years, from LA originally. The international room here is staggering. I'm very impressed with this United Nations of marketing talent in this room. So thank you very much, and thanks very much to Julian for including me in your lineup. So the challenge in the time I have is to explain a market of 320 million people. So what I'll try to do is stay at that 30,000 foot, 10,000 meter level, recognizing that the US is many countries in one. So very briefly, a little just about me. I've written a book called Working with Americans, which often gets tears of joy or tears of laughter, depending on what country you're in. And I have really been working on trying to help companies figure out how to win in the economy that is the United States. Highly fragmented, highly regionalized, but at a certain level, the rules of the game of how you do business with Americans is the same wherever in the 50 states you might be. So that's what we're going to really look at over the course of the next few minutes together. And besides writing the book, I used to live in Germany. I was raised in Germany as a kid. So for those that want me to inflict my rusty Bavarian German on you, we can do that at the break. But first and foremost, a few things I'm going to cover in the time we are together. Just first off, some top tips. How does the business culture of the United States actually work? Following that, a few scenarios you might find yourself in as you go about trying to win and retain American clients. Of course, the Network One is a fantastic resource. And how do you use that resource? Building on the last session, how do you do that performance? How do you do the pitch? And how do you make Americans really, really want to work with you? And then what next? What can you keep learning before we open the floor to questions? I know some of my fellow Americans are here today, so your role is to help keep me honest. And if you see or hear anything you think, no, 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 that is not how we are in the United States, please feel obliged to say otherwise. But I'm pretty confident that I have us figured out. You have to leave your country to see it see it objectively. It's the fish don't know they're in water syndrome. So first off, just to put into context the sheer size of the United States. So as a Californian, if you see here, it's the size of the UK economy. I don't like to remind my fellow Londoners or British clients and colleagues of this very often, but it is pretty remarkable that just one of the 50 states is the size alone of one of the G7 members, or G8 for that matter. Italy and Texas, not likely partners in probably many people's minds, but isn't it amazing that the Texas economy is roughly the size of Italy's? And then as you can see, a nice spread, the Switzerland there for New York, let's see, Indonesia and Florida. So it just helps you maybe put into perspective just how massive the economy of the United States is. And that requires, to some degree, localization from what you do in your part of the world to what you want to do in the United States, and making sure you get that global and local balance absolutely right. So there isn't a single template necessarily, but it's about understanding and spending time in the place so you know what adaptations and localizations you're going to have to make in the course of offering your services. So one of the things I'll briefly touch on now, this is sort of the academic part of our session. So for those of you that want to go back to your emails or phones, now's your time. But basically, this is a model of 9 dimensions to describe any business culture. And it's created by a company called Country Navigator. And through their research and their model to describe cultures, they have these 9 dimensions. And within their massive database is the United States as well as 99 other countries around the globe. So very briefly, you can see that their model has 3 key branches, if you like. You've got 3 around relating, you have 3 around regulating, and you have 3 around reasoning. So regardless of what business culture you're in, if you use these 9 dimensions, you have a method now and a vocabulary to describe what you already intuitively know, describes or it feels different, but now you can actually label it for when you go to these different parts of the world. So this is a profile of the United States. This is the data extracted from their data set of all of the respondents who have said, I'm American. So what might you notice? Well, a few things. You might notice that all the blue dots are along the left-hand side. And if you look at other countries around the world, such as, for example, France, parts of Southeast Asia, the blue dots are squarely towards the right-hand edge of these dimensions. So what is this telling you? It's telling you that Americans are task-oriented. Let's get the job done first, and then we'll get to know you later on. It's a bit transactional. And so it may be corroborating what you already know and feel, but you couldn't maybe put a label on it before. The other thing is American English, and I've learned this now after 35 years of being in London, we don't understand irony, not because we don't have a sense of humor. It's because American English is a very different, very direct, low-context version of English. So we don't understand irony because American English is functional. It's a tool that has evolved because of the immigration waves that we've had in our history and the fact that we've had to get people up to speed, working quickly without nuances that might be lost on them. So American English is quite a functional low-context tool and very explicit. And we focus on the individual. So what do we mean by that? We're not, we give credit to the individual person in a team. Individual performance is called out. We have shout-outs, which is, again, to recognize what an individual team member has done. And we do that for each team member rather than collectively rewarding and recognizing the team. We recognize the individual contributors and what they've done to make the team successful. Then you've got the regulating piece where you'll notice, not surprisingly, a fairly high risk appetite. And you only need to read the Wall Street Journal or the FT or any other business press to notice that a lot of risk-taking also comes with some downsides, such as prison in some cases. But we are definitely a culture that has a high risk appetite. And then we also are very time controlled, so we are tight on time. We're schedules driven. We use time as a very key metric. We ask if, this meeting's been a good use of your time, if you had a good time. In Singapore, time is ultimately what it's about in the culture. And then finally, in this regulating cluster is shared versus concentrated about decision making. This implies it's a fairly democratic approach. We do consult to make sure that decisions are co-owned. That is not necessarily from a democracy motive, but probably more of a job preservation motive. So if we take a decision and it doesn't go to plan, well, I can say, oh, but it wasn't just my decision. I consulted a lot of people, and 15, 20 others in my business or in our organization also thought this was a good idea. So let's move now to the final 3 of this particular model. So we have linear circular, which is about logic. Linear meaning we understand stories that follow a chronology. So circular is very confusing for us, where ideas maybe or stories are told not necessarily along a timeline, but as the parts of the story are remembered. We need to have a linear, sequential way of understanding your pitch, for example, or how your agency has evolved and grown. Then we prefer facts over theory. So we start with data, and then we work that into a theory, rather than starting with a theory that governs why the data. And then finally, simple and complex is about our appetite for context. We're a generally low context business culture, which basically means tell us the foreground, tell us the bottom line. We don't necessarily need to know all of the backstory, all of the interactions, how did we get to today, what's the story of our company or our agency, we were founded in year X. Thank you, maybe later. The bottom line is, what can you do for me? So we're very focused on the foreground, not necessarily the background. So having said all that, here's a few top tips, which hopefully will help advance your own success with the US counterparts that you're negotiating with. So in no particular order, bigger is better. That's one of the ginormous Cadillac Escalade cars that you might think looks like a lorry or a truck, but it's actually a sedan, and they're regularly on American roads. Why do we care about bigger is better? Because we've never had to economize. The US is an economy of abundance. So this is a demonstration of the fact that we can have a really large car, which actually, on the one hand, is great if you're in the US, but if you are trying to fit into a very narrow car parking space, which the Tesco brand Fresh and Easy in the US learned to their cost when they used a British car parking template for their American stores, that can be a problem. Another top tip to think about is the time is money. So back to that point I mentioned about time, we're very time sensitive. So we will be maybe looking at our watches partway through your pitch or the meeting, if we're in person, even if we're on Zoom or Skype or Teams or whatever platform virtually, we similarly will be looking at how much time we've been on the call. So we need to make sure to remind Americans that this is value that they are getting from the call and from the experience. And what does that value look like, which is a build on the panel session of a few minutes ago. Another top tip, what you say is what you get. So it's back to keep the context low. Be explicit, be direct, ask for the sale, which is what we do in the US. It's not about implication that we wouldn't be here unless, of course, we wanted to win your business. You really need to say it out loud. What do we need to do to win this contract, to be appointed as your agency? So ask for what you want in American English. That'll serve you well. Yet another top tip is about the win-win game theory. So the goal is to make sure that in this negotiation, I structure it so that every party feels like they've got something out of it that they wanted. And in an economy of abundance, you can operate win-win game theory because no one is concerned that if I win, you have to lose something so that we net still a comfortable zero sum. This is all about, hey, there's enough to go around, the pot is huge, who cares? Tell me what you want, I'll tell you what I want, and we'll find a way for everybody to make it work. So that's quite important to bear in mind in your negotiations. Yet another is this idea of fail fast, fail often. There is no taint in the US business culture to failure. It's a learning experience. So actually, if you look at and you talk to headhunters, a lot of the people that are being recruited for tech firms and other types of firms in the US are those that have actually been through a corporate failure, at least one. In fact, the more, the better, because you've learned what the signs are of a failing business, you can predict it, and therefore this is something that has great value for organizations. So test and learn, rapid iteration, design thinking, a lot of these ideas have now imbued all sorts of businesses, not just creative industries and comms and PR and advertising and through the line agencies, but across the board. So, having said all that, one more idea is the just for me. We really want to feel like you have personalized your offering. So as you assemble your pitch document, use the American client's name as often as you possibly can. Make them feel that you've put this customized assembly of services together. How you've put the various Network One partners into the mix is because this is just for you. And the reason I'm showing you this is because there's a little interesting backstory to this Starbucks example. So obviously with Starbucks, 80% or so of the Starbucks value proposition and menu is the same around the world. There are some flavorings and some seasonal offerings on the menu by country, but generally speaking, the 80-20 rule applies in this Starbucks example. And they even put your name on the cup as you place your order. What's your name? Can't get much more personalized than that. Now, in the UK, not so long ago, Starbucks put a ginormous cup on counters in its stores, and people thought, wow, I've never seen a coffee cup that size before. And it was called the Trenta, which if you speak Italian, any Italian speakers in here? What, Trenta? What's Trenta? Trenta. 30, okay? 30 ounces of coffee. How big is that? Well, it's a bottle of wine and a few more ounces on top of that, okay? Now, in the UK, which is a little less of a, well, maybe it doesn't have a supersize outlook, this looked like you don't understand this marketplace, because we would never embrace a 30-ounce cup of coffee, or any drink for that matter. And not surprisingly, Starbucks withdrew that size cup only a few weeks after that size appeared on the counters. So maybe they were just trialing it to see could we actually sell British people a 30-ounce coffee, and they learned that no, there's no appetite for that. But it still will have your name on it, even if it's 30 ounces in the US. So we like to think that you've put together things just for us. Now, you might find yourself in some of these scenarios, which I'm sure you will, such as, how do you sell the story of your agency, of the Network One that companies and partners that you've assembled? Well, you turn up the volume. So one of the things I find often in trying to help professional services firms especially is to make sure that you are sufficiently confident in the US market. We really value confidence. We like to hear you've won awards, that you're number one, that you were selected from a really competitive shortlist. So if the volume is at sort of 7 or 8, make it 11 out of 10, because we really want that energy and to hear how fantastic you are. Another scenario that you're likely to find yourselves in is handling a disagreement with an American counterpart. How do you do that? Well, one of the reasons I put this in here is because not so long ago, a comms agency client of mine had a contract that they presented come back from their US counterparts. And of course, the legal department had a chance to use the red pen or the track changes in Word, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. And there were lots of marked out clauses, and no, this won't work here, and we have to have the jurisdiction as the United States, not England and Wales, for example. So to go back and say, no, this is really, as the UK agency, this is really what we want, you couldn't just highlight these were the problems that you had with the contract. You had to go a step further and suggest the remedies, suggest what the fixes are. So rather than just pick apart, here's what we don't like, you have to go the next step and anchor your American in the future. We are future-oriented as a business culture. We're looking out the front of the car window. We're not looking in the rearview mirror. So whatever suggestions you might not like the contract, therefore make sure that it's suggesting the remedies, if you like, the fixes. And yet another suggestion is persist. We are all about persistence. So you might say, well, I've left a few voicemails for this client. They haven't responded. Oh, they must not be interested. No, they're really busy. So keep emailing, keep phoning, get hold of the executive assistant if there is one, and try to lock an appointment in for a phone call, but keep at it. Don't give up. Don't assume that because they haven't responded within, a few hours or a few days that they aren't interested. Not at all. It means they're just distracted and they're probably doing 10 jobs at the same time. So do please keep at it. So here's a few quick stories of products that may work in one place and not everywhere else. Cheese Whiz. My American colleagues in the room will know what this is. This is cheese that you can spray out of a can. Now, I use the word cheese loosely, but technically it qualifies as a cheese. And this is, this is when the French and the Italians leave the room. So this is a product that, will probably only ever work in the United States. It's handy for car journeys because you don't have to need a knife. You can spray it on a biscuit or a cracker and you have your instant snack. Next, you have a range of Bush's beans. Now my husband's absolute favorite that I'm instructed to get whenever I go back to the US. And as you can see, there's 8 varieties of baked beans. If you compare it to what the UK, for example, offers with Heinz, you can get regular Heinz and you can get low sugar Heinz. And that's about it, not 8 variants. So it's back to that make it just for me point. I may want the barbecue flavored one day, or I may want the low salt, low sugar version another day. I may want the vegetarian one without the bacon, etc. The next one, another US product, is a diaper cream with that name, which probably will not work in other parts of the world, but Boudreaux's butt paste, I kid you not, is a very popular product. Bottom left, Pret-a-Manger, they went into the US market. They're a sandwich chain originally from the UK. They found out by experimentation and terrible feedback when they first opened their store in New York that New Yorkers and generally Americans do not have butter on their bagels. And we have cream cheese and salmon, but not butter cream cheese and salmon. So again, a little bit of homework would have taught them, would save them a lot of money and time in not doing something that wouldn't have appeal. Fresh and Easy is the Tesco format I mentioned already. They went into the US market. They did a lot of research. They spent millions of dollars, and unfortunately, they didn't really listen to their own research. And what happened, their stores were not successful for a variety of reasons, not least pre-packing the produce. Net bags of oranges, for example, that we don't buy things in bags pre-packed, pre-edited. We choose each item. We cast our vote. And then finally, Volkswagen. So you might think, oh, is this the story of the emissions scandal? No, it's actually a story of the fact that in their Louisville, Kentucky plant, they spent millions of dollars to customize their cars for the American market. How? They actually invested to move the manual transmission back, sort of 3-4 inches further back, to accommodate a cup holder for US cars. It was a deal breaker in the American market. If you didn't have a cup holder, you aren't going to sell any Volkswagens or any other cars for that matter. So it was worth it for them to make that kind of localization for that marketplace. So, very briefly, what next? Have a couple chapters from the book. You can contact me on email. You can take a Are You Ready to Work with Americans quiz. But I hope that you are enthused by this giant economy and that you can use the power, for example, of the colleagues and partners in this room from the Network One to really make sure that your American client proposition is going to appeal. So, do I have a moment for a question?
We'll let you have one.
One question. Okay, good.
There'll be many more, but we'll have a little time later.
Okay. Can I take any question that might have occurred to you over the course of the last few minutes about the American market? Great. Here at the front. Here comes your mic.
Thank you. Really interesting. When I think of the States right now, I think of polarization. So I think of red versus blue, for example.
Yep.
Is that translating into the business culture that was so distinct? Are you seeing kind of fragmentation of that?
Yeah. So I'm not seeing that, and my clients aren't seeing that, because in some ways, business is transcending your political color. And we haven't got to the stage, and I hope we don't get to the stage of, well, I'm not going to do business with you because you voted for that person and not that person. So actually, commerce, as we know by all being in this room, is a unifier. It builds relationships across divides. And so I am very optimistic that it will continue to be the glue that unites Americans rather than divides us. Yeah, thanks for asking. That's a great question. Great.
Fantastic.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.